the marble veining to the stone first. I typically like to put the value of the marble on first and then add the veining later. So we're going to go ahead and add this marker. Again, I'm going to use a straight edge to do a crisp edge here on the corner. And this is the Cool 30. So I'm going to try to break up the direction of the marker a little bit so it feels like there's some light hitting that, but I want the edge to look crisp. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that in a little more solid, and then add some diagonals here as if maybe there's some floor treatment like a white tile or something that's bouncing a highlight on the marble in that edge. So again, I'm just going to use my marker with a straight edge here to give a kind of a crisp feel along that side. So now I'm going to do that same kind of value here in the niche by still using the Cool 30, and say the light's coming this way, so I'm casting a little shadow here first and along the top. So now I'm going to cast some more diagonals, into this area. You might add a few little shampoo bottles, which aren't shown in the sketch on page 179, but I went ahead and added them in because we're going to use those to add a touch of pencil into the mix. Okay, so notice how if I'm adding different layers of the same marker, you can get those dimensional effects of light and dark. So here I'm adding a soft touch of the 30, and I'm just going to add another coat of it right here where I'm trying to cast the shadow. So you can also use your chisel or your fine tip if you feel like you need more control on that. But usually for broad areas of marker, I'd like to use the broad tip you see here. Okay, so now I'm going to take the Cool 10 and just add some soft diagonals in this area. So again, it feels like the light's hitting the stone. Now the other thing is when you're trying to create a texture, notice how I'm just kind of scribbling with the marker with the 10 to try to make it feel like there's a mottled tone in the marble. So I'm going to do that mottled tone here on all surfaces by just kind of scribbling with the marker. Okay, and now I'm going to take another coat of the 30 on this side. This part's not in your book, but I just went ahead and added it in so you can see how the value would change at the corner. Okay, so we'll just vignette that off. The other thing you can do with these is to take your colorless blender, and you can put a coat down first of the blender, which sometimes it smooths out the paper, but see how that also washes in your marker strokes. So if you feel like the marker strokes are too pronounced, you can always take the blender to smooth them out. Okay, so now let's or if you have an area where it looks too dark, you can just smooth it out like that. So remember, the blender's like your paintbrush full of water. So let's get one step more dramatic by taking one more coat of the 30, on this little cast shadow here and at the top. And I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit more here to this back side of this plane, just to ground it. All right, there we go. So that's your base coat. Now let's add a little bit of marker color for the shampoo bottles. So again, just adding some kind of an accent tone would be helpful. Okay, so I'm just going to think of the lights coming this way, so I'm just going to add some color down the other side. Okay, got your shampoo and conditioner there. All right, and now we're going to add in the marker veining, but we're going to let that dry for a little bit. So let's just leave that one here for a second. And we're going to add some pencil veining in there as well as the marker. So why don't we put the marker veining in now? So we're going to take the Cool 70 and actually, you know what? I'm going to use the Cool 30 again on this lighter area, just so you can get the feel of it before you have to commit to a big swath. But the important thing about veining is it's not going to go continuous side to side, unless it's been matched to do so. So typically what you want to do when you're doing a marble or stone vein, you're going to have it where it feels thicker in some areas and then it tapers into a thinner line. So no, I do need to do this darker so you guys can see it. So let's just go for it and go with the 70. Okay, so I'm going to press a little thicker here and then taper it down. And then I want to do a different direction. So I'm going to press a little thicker here. And notice how the line tapers because the vein is going down into the slab. So I'm kind of using some pressure but then very much lightening it up so that it can feel like the veining feels more random. So I don't want it to be like it's a little short, short choppy vein like that. I want it to feel like it continues on across the slab. And you can look at a photo of the type of marble that you're rendering, which would be very helpful to see going different directions depending on what surface you're doing. And again, I'm just kind of letting this get dragged along the surface. And we're going to add some pencil to further enhance the effect here. But you're starting to see how that can look like stone. Now I'm going to use the same marker. Again, this is the 70, but notice how I'm going in a different direction, meaning I didn't take this and continue onward. This is a new slab, so it's going to have new vein going in different direction and not connecting to the veining on this side particularly. It's going to have its own pattern, you know, unless it's been intentionally matched, which is not the usual situation. Okay, so you want it to feel like it's going in its own directions. And then we'll just put a little bit on this side since it's our vignette. I'm not going to do as much over here, just to get the idea that it continues on. All right, so now we'll let that dry, and then I'll show you how we'll add the pencil in next. But let's say we're also going to do wood. So wood is just like any other tone like we did with the gray. You can layer the color on, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll put the blender on first. So this is on page 168 of your book. There's some examples of wood that you can follow. So I'm going to put the blender on first to create kind of a smooth background for my marker so that it looks shinier. Okay, and now I'm going to take some of the dark brown and start to lay that in different patches. So also it can be helpful to rotate your paper around so that you're not putting your hand through the marker. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate my paper and rotate my chisel tip to different sides so that I can get that initial fill. Again, you can use your straight edge if you want, but these are just practice, so it's really not necessary. But we're going to show you how the wood veining can vary from the marble veining, and the wood graining will vary from the marble veining. Okay, so again, adding some different tone. Now, if I want to enrich that, I could take a darker tone into that too. So that was the dark brown. I'm going to take some of the dark umber. Hang on a second, get that out. And show you how just adding a little bit of that in there can make a different tone in the wood. So it just brings in a little red, a bit of a red tone. So I'm using the broad tip to bring the grain from edge to edge. So with wood, unlike stone, the grain does go all the way from edge to edge. And so depending on the type of wood is how figured the grain is, meaning how much does it wave? Is it more straight or does it have waves in it? Okay, so you're starting to see that feeling of tone in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and add another coat of the dark brown to layer on the color. And I tend to, as you know, like to leave a little bit of hint of white here in a few spots so it feels like light's hitting. So you're starting to see that tone of the wood. Okay, so just like the vein, depending on how the light's in it, you know, you could have a diagonal coming through here to feel like, you know, there's light coming in from a doorway that's casting some lighting effects onto the floor. That can be a fun way to vary the tone also. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry also, and then I'll show you how to put some pencil on there next. Then finally today, we're gonna be doing some ceramic tile. So on this one, you wanna pick 2 different colors. So let's say if you wanna have a blue-green tile color, I'm gonna start by putting the lime green down first. And again, I don't wanna go continuous. I'm going to do it kind of patchy because I want light to feel like it's hitting this glazed ceramic tile. So see how I'm varying on this one? I'm going to vary my marker strokes so that the tile looks like it's catching the light. Again, notice as I put a second coat on that the color starts to darken and deepen a little bit. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is add this light blue, the light cerulean blue, on top of that. And again, by varying the strokes, it's going to create a mottled effect that I'm going to use to make that tile look glossy and glazed. Again, I'm going one direction, then another to smooth it in. And you know, I so wish we could be doing this together so I could help you with this. But the main thing I would advise is just, you know, get the paper, get the markers, experiment, have fun. Who knows, you'll probably come up with a better technique than these. And there's plenty of other things to. Okay, so I know this cut off a little bit toward the end, so I just want to recap a few of the pencil effects just to make sure those were all covered. So the first one is after you do your tile wash with your 2 layers of marker, then you're going to pick a contrasting pencil. In this case, I'm using the Van Dyke Brown, and I'm going to follow my perspective lines to start to add in some. Get this one straight, to add in some grout lines. So you can see how by creating that contrast, you are going to be able to see the size of the tile, whether it's like a 6x6 or a rectilinear shape. And then also you want to make sure that your pencil stays nice and sharp, because if the line starts to get too thick, like this one here got a little bit thick, it starts to get out of scale. Okay? You can also use the white if it's a dark tile background, excuse me, and also use the white for things like highlighting detail. So here, like on these bottles, I'm just going to put a little bit of glow of white there and into the reflection, along with the reflected color of the blue. Whoops. I juggle in my spare time. Anyway. Who has that anymore, right? Okay, so see how I'm putting a little bit of that blue to reflect into the white marble. And then also taking some of the gray pencil, gotta find my gray, and then I'm going to use that to add in some more of these grout lines, some of the fainter ones. So the heavy ones we put in with the marker, and some of the faint veining in the marble put in with pencil. So you start to get that feeling of texture. Now remember, sometimes less is more. You know, you just want to get the feeling of the veining, not make it too busy. So just adding a few of those fine lines in there will give you the texture. We're also added the pencil into the wood tone by adding a darker pencil. In this case, I'm using this deeper blue on the brown, just to cool it up a little bit. And you can see that with the shadow. So I added some striations of that, and along with this cream pencil to give it a warmer tone in between those lines. So again, with wood graining, the grain goes from edge to edge of the wood. Okay, so you want to make sure you're bringing your line all the way from edge to edge on that plank. It doesn't chop off in the middle like the marble veining can do. All right, so again, with the marker and the pencil, make sure that you've read the attachment that I've sent on the email about the use of colored pencil. And then, make sure the marker's completely dry before you add the pencil effects there. But again, don't be afraid to try some experimentation. So, maybe even try shading a flavoring tone like this with the pencil on something and see if you like it. Sometimes I can just see how that beautifully enriches everything just by adding that little undercast of blue. So that will really bring the colors into a more vibrant and more dimensional effect in your rendering. Okay, so enjoy, do this first, and then we'll move into the homework assignment next. These you'll just be taping into your sketchbook along with the warm-up that I told you to do, and then the assignment is the one that you'll photograph and email to me to grade. If you want to photograph anything and send it to me to take a look at, feel free to do so, but the ones that I'll be collecting via email are your assignments. These are just your sketchbook practice sketches. Okay, hope that's clear. If you have any questions, give me a shout out, and take care, and I missed you guys. Talk to you later. Bye.
Action.
Okay. All right, everyone. Before you do your homework with using the marker paper, you're going to want to do this warm-up for your sketchbook. And this is on page 96 of your textbook. You'll find this image. And what you're seeing here is an open office workstation. And then we have an Eileen Gray lacquer block screen here. So you know what, I'm a fan of hers. Anyway, so you're going to be using mainly cool gray here. And you can overlay your book and trace it. Notice there's these scale figures back here that's giving you a sense of the setting. So the important thing for this one is you're going to be practicing the reflections like we talked about in class. So see how the file reflects straight down. So if you're doing, let's say, the 50 layers of 50 for the file, I did 30 down here for the drawer, and then a little bit of 70 underneath for that shadow. Or for example, if you see these dark areas for, let's say, using 70 or 90, you're going to use the 30 again to bring those reflections into the floor. If you'll notice the values on the pedestal, you'll see that white reflected down into the floor, and then the darker reflected into the floor, as well as the striations on the lacquered top. So it's important to leave white here, in every area that's going to be catching the light on these curves, for example, on the pedestal. And then you're going to go ahead and use your cream or a different color. You could use a red chair if you want, whatever color you want for the chair. But notice how you're going to leave those little bits of white on the edges. Okay, so you want to try to capture that light. And then there's a little pear here on the desk. So this is where you could use some pencils. You can use the green pencil for the pear and the little green in the desk, and then notice how the outline of the reflection for the pear is in white. So there's a little bit of white here and here to pop that reflection on the desktop, which is the glossy desktop. Okay, so the white pencil can be used to enhance or create, highlights on a few things where you're wanting to perhaps, build up a value change again. So here we have this dark edge, the gray, and then there's a little bit of white, or I could use some white here across the screen to make it feel like the light from this office is glaring onto the screen. Okay, so this will be your warm-up. Again, ranges of cool gray with a few color accents, and then you're going to be on page 96 of your book for that, and again, it's on the marker paper. Okay, so for your homework on marker paper, you're going to find a photo of a bathroom, and you want to find one that has, 3 to 5 different materials. So for example, you can see on this one I've got some marble, the porcelain, the wood countertop, the chrome, the glass. And so you want some kind of mixture of materials like that so you can practice these marker and pencil effects, okay? So you can trace the photo, or you can use your sight lines like we've practiced, add those sight lines, put another layer on, and refine until you get to your finished product. And then one thing that you can easily trace from the flimsy to the marker paper is by taping the flimsy up to a window pane and then putting your marker paper on top. So with the marker paper, you can use a straight edge, again, to draw your initial line drawing. And notice my line weights are pretty consistent too, although I've tried to break up the line weights on some of the soft edges. And also note that if your line goes off, just keep going because you can adjust it with the marker. So let's say one of your lines smudged or got a little wonky. Don't worry about that. You're not even going to notice it once the marker's on there. So now we're going to start by adding the lightest tones first. So what I want to do is I'm going to use the colorless blender, and I'm just going to kind of give this area that I want to do the marble a little bit of a coating with the blender first. Okay, so we're going to do this in stages, and I might film this speeded up, so that this is going to take a while for this demo, so that you can kind of see it in different stages. But I just put the blender on. Now I'm going to take the Cool 30 and just add a little bit of that up in this corner with the light pressure. Okay, now I want to take the Cool 10 and blend through that. Well, it's still wet. And I'm going to, remember how we practiced that on the other drawing, just kind of create a scribble of 10 coming down to start to imply the texture of the stone. Okay, see how that starts to give it a kind of a mottled effect for the stone? Okay, now I'm going to take the 10 also and put it here in some of the folds of the towel. So where it folds in, just putting a little 10 there, or where it overlaps. That can start to give a feeling of folds in the fabric. Okay, now we're going to go with one step, or start to develop this darker area. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start with the 30, do the same thing where I'm going to lay in a little of that 30. Notice I'm rotating the paper so I can get into that area without dragging my hand through the marker. I'm going to lay a little of the 30 here in the corner. And then start to bring it down here through the glass. So I want to be able to pop that corner, creating a smooth finish. By using long, smooth strokes on the paper with my broad tip. Okay, so notice though that the photo is quite a bit darker, right, if you'll recall. So now I'm going to take the 70 and go in there with a little bit darker value. Again, if I can use some long, smooth strokes, that'll help it get a nice, even application. Now, if I'm starting to see lines in there, remember I can also use the blender and just smooth those out. So sometimes it's nice, again, to put the blender on just to give yourself a smooth coating as you start to work it through. Now, I don't mind having that patch of light there because that's going to feel like the downlight right here casting onto the wall. So now I want to try to fill this area in a little bit more solidly, just with long, smooth strokes again. So I'm just using the point of my chisel to smooth in around those lines where I want the transition of the material. And then using the broad point of the chisel where I want to cast the color of the wall. Okay, I'm starting to see that. Now I'm going to do the same thing down in this area. So again, we might put this on a speeded up pace so you can see this. So I'm not going to talk, so my voice won't sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks. I'm not going to talk while I put this on in case we speed it up. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit more Cool 30, second coat up in here. And down into the shower pan. Putting some verticals in to look reflective. Okay. And now I'm going to put a little bit more 30 over on this side. Trying to make this look like a reflection in the glass. Okay, starting to get that going. So now we're going to take some other areas. So for example, we're going to add the frame to the window. So again, I'm going to use the French 90 for that. And I'm not going to talk so that we can speed it up. Here's this front. Okay, so as you can see, we moved ahead a little bit more. And so I wanted to go over how to do the floor. So I used dark brown here, the dark brown marker, and notice how I've established then the values on the back wall. So I'm going to use those back wall values reflected into the floor by simply following a vertical line down with the tip of my marker and bringing that vertical line down into the floor. So you can see here the width of the frame here, even the bottom part of the frame, kind of implying where the other half would go. And I'm making this area darker by dragging those verticals down into the floor. So all of this area, again, would go darker. If I follow this line down, notice that dark wall here. I can put some verticals in this area. Remember, it's always okay to turn your paper. That way your hand doesn't drag through your marker. Okay, so you can see how that starts to read at a darker value than the top, which is because this side is facing away from the window. Okay, so as we start to add in more elements, notice then that I use the Cool 30 to, let's see, so to start to tone in the bowl. So where it curves, it's going to pick up a darker value, and we're going to add some pencil to that too to pick up some flavoring. So again, I'm thinking of this facing away from the window being a little bit darker. That was with the Cool 30. I also added some of that into the folds of the towel to start to get that some dimension. On the chrome, you're going to be adding in some, I used some Cool 70 here with the fine point. Just add a few verticals as if it's a cylinder where it's turning. So that's going to give that a more reflective feel. So you can use the same thing, use the 70 here on some of the underside or the shadow sides of elements with the fine point, and that'll help pop some of those with more dimension. Okay, then finally I'm going to go back to my Cool 30 and start to add in with a fine point. Oops, sorry, this is the Cool 10. Let me get the 30 back. I'm going to use the 30 to start to add in some veining into the marble. So I'm just going to add some light squiggles in here to get more texture, to do more defined veins in the marble. So I would continue in this vein until I get, no pun intended, until I get to this where I'm starting to see this textural effect with the Cool 30, these kind of vein lines in the marble. You can also go back in and add in, you know, whatever, depending on what's going on with your own photo. You remember to go add other layers. So I'm going to go back and add another layer here to the shadow side of the tree, using the 30 again, just to start to give that a little bit more solidity so it feels present. We want it to look atmospheric, but not too ghostly where it doesn't read as an actual tree. So, okay. So now I'm starting to get things ready to add pencil. So that's going to be our last step. So you want to find the pencils that are going to work for your value changes. So for example, I'm going to use white. I'm going to use some flavoring of blue and also the brown. So starting with the sink again, I'm going to take a little bit of the brown and just shade that into the curve of the sink lightly. So when I'm using a flavoring technique, I'm trying to use a light pressure on the pencil. So it just gets a little casting of that color. You don't want to press hard and make it look like, you know, there's a painted streak on the sink. So I can do the same thing with the white by bringing in a few touches of white in the chrome to get that kind of soft gleam onto the cool gray background. Okay, I'm going to use the blue on things like the towel, where maybe I want to suggest a band of embroidery or color, and just to give that a little bit of definition and visual interest, by just like on our practice exercise, following along the contours of the towel so I can get a sense of a little extra element there. So now for flavoring, I'm going to take that blue and just shade a little bit into the wood tone here to enrich the brown. And so again, that's an artistic device. Obviously there's no blue in the brown. I'm just bringing your eye up here, and I'm going to shade a little bit of blue into the porcelain sink as well, and maybe just a tiny bit into the chrome. Okay, so you can see as you develop that, going back to my finished one, I can create those kind of reflected casts, you know, of those adjoining areas into those white surfaces. And finally, you're going to take your straight edge, and using your straight edge, you can take the white pencil if you're having tile, or remember, if your tile's light, you might be using a dark pencil color for the grout. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure my pencil point's sharp and start to lay in evenly spaced grout lines. Now, you don't have to see them all clearly. Remember, you might, because it's actually how we see, we might see some clearly, and then others will fade into the background. So you just want enough on there so that you can tell what that material is going to be. So for example, You can see I'm starting to get that contrast with the white against the dark. So ultimately it will end up looking more like this, where I'm seeing those a little more clearly, but notice how it breaks up in certain areas. So again, I want to make sure that they're not just all gridded out perfectly, because that's not how we see. And then the last step is going to be to do reinforcing and highlight. So this, if you have an opaque white, this can be a good time to bring that out for things like the highlights on the chrome. So notice how I used an opaque white right here to put that hotter gleam on the shower head. Same thing on the handle here, using an opaque white, or a little touch of it here on the chrome of the sink. So every place that the metal is curving toward the light, you're getting just that little pop of that hot white. So I'll show you a bit right here, which will enhance that visual effect of reflection. Now the other thing is, you're going to add, that music got kind of loud, sorry. You're going to add some reinforcing lines. So you'll take your heavier line weight and just pop some edges to help you get, so for example, I'm popping these edges to help you get a feeling of the underside of the sink, overlapping the counter, you know, where these are shadowed by the countertop, or the edge of the countertop reinforced, or the bottom of the shower pan, the underside of the curve here. And those things are going to, again, pull all the detail out of the marker wash. So once you've got all that in place, then voila, you've got your completed rendering. So just have fun with it. I know the marker paper can feel kind of awkward and strange in the beginning, but again, if you just go with it, don't give up, push through that, know that you're not going to be happy with it halfway through, just keep going. You're going to pull the detail back out with your pencil and your reinforcing lines, and that's going to help you get to your finished product. All right, so of course, email me if you have any questions, and have fun drawing. Can you turn the music down a little bit, honey? Can you wait till... Okay, so for today's lesson, we're going to start on how to render a floor plan and make it more dimensional. So I'll send you instructions via the email on the beginning of the assignment, but this particular part of the assignment is to how to show cast shadows in the plan so that it reads more dimensionally. So if you're looking, here's just a quick sketch of a vacation rental. So we've got the entrance here, a small kitchen with a bar, 3 bar stools, a dining table, little seating area with a television area, the bathroom, washer, dryer, and a small bedroom. Okay, so we're going to note that there's glass all along this area, maybe out to a nice view, and that the sun's going to be coming in from that the left diagonal. So we want to add cast shadows around the furniture, again, to make that look more three-dimensional and compelling. So we want to stick to that angle coming from the sun. So here at a 45, I'm going to take a 45, and then I would be doing this with marker, but I'm just showing you in this green so you can see. I'll be taking a 45 off those two back sides of the table. So remember with sunlight, the light's going to stay consistent. So I want this angle and this angle off the table to be that consistent 45. And then all of this I would fill in with shadow. Now the shadow will be bigger or longer, or shorter, I should say, based on how tall that piece of furniture is. Okay, so if I'm looking off the kitchen counter and it's a little bit taller than the table, I'm going to take that same 45 and cast out just a little bit longer. So then I'll connect those dots. And this will be done, first you put that in with pencil and then use your marker to fill in. Instead of inking it in with a black outline, it'll all just be done with a marker casting. So, you know, something like, depending on the paper you're using, maybe like the Cool 50 or the French 60 might be a good cast shadow. So you can see how that's casting the shadow off the counter. Now, I'm not going to put a cast shadow here, there's the refrigerator, but maybe on this side of the wall a little bit, just to give that more dimension. Okay? So I would do the same thing here off the sofa, bringing that angle in, casting it around, keeping that direction consistent. So here where I have a curved piece, excuse me, notice how it's coming from, the angle of the chair is coming from that 45. So I'm just going to come straight off the back of the chair and bring a curve around the back. Okay, so on this one, the side of the chair is facing the 45. So I'm just going to come off the back and the side and curve it around this way. If that makes sense. So trying to notice how we're trying to keep the shadows the same angle all the way through. So I'm going to do that off the table. And sometimes, as you can see, the shadows will kind of mingle or, connect with each other. So you could even put a little shadow, like if this was a bowl on the table or a box, might even shade that to create more contrast. Or if you see on this console, I might just bring the shadow off of this one side. So hopefully you're getting that feel of it. So let's talk about some of the other rooms here, and then I'll come back to how to shade the furniture itself. So notice with the bathroom, even though I have a wall here, I'm going to still keep the light consistent because I have a window right here. Sometimes you'll see if the window's, small, you'll cast a shadow going the other way. But I usually like to keep it just the same so the drawing looks cohesive. So I'm going to cast a shadow into this side of the tub, off this side of the tub. It can just be a narrow one in this case because I don't want to take up the whole bathroom. And then off this side of the toilet, and this side of the sink. So you see how that's starting to give it a feeling of more dimension. Okay? And then, maybe even off this side of the counter, just to pop those with a little more depth. Okay, moving on into the bedroom, same thing. If this is a dresser, even though I have the window here and this is a solid wall, I could cast the light this way. So let's just do that so you can see what it looks like. I'm just going to do a small cast shadow around the dresser this way, and then I'm going to just put a small cast shadow off this side of the bed, and then off this side of the chair facing away from the window. Okay, so that's another way to do it, but usually you want to keep them consistent. And then finally, you also want to think about casting the shadow on the furniture itself. So if I'm looking at the angle coming this way, you can have the sofa. Sometimes what would be nice is just put a little curve in it right here, and you're going to shade this part with darker marker. Or if you're doing a hand sketch, you could just kind of hatch it in like this too, to show your client if you're doing a quick space plan and just giving the plan more dimension. So again, I'm going to go this way. And this one I'm not going to cast a shadow in because remember the chair is facing toward the light. Okay, so on these, same thing. If I have a back to the chair, I might just put a little scoop of shadow right here. And then maybe on this side of this chair's where the table's casting onto the seat. So the goal is to try to make these elements look more three-dimensional. So again, if I had an accessory item on the counter, these are going to be pendant lights, but let's just say I have a bowl of fruit here on the counter, I would cast it that way. Or on this console table, again, cast it off. Or I guess this will be a buffet or credenza, cast it off in this direction. Okay, so this is going to be art on the wall. We'll talk about that later. Now notice with the plant, I'll also have a cast shadow, but maybe it'll look a little softer going around like that. Okay, so this is just to give you a primer on how to start thinking about the direction the light's coming into the space. And we're going to render this on the Canson paper with marker to get this effect. But again, the light's coming from this corner, so notice how the shadows are just falling away from that direction in the rendering. All right, thank you.